Hi everyone, hope you are doing well. Let's start in another 3-4 minutes. Let's give some time for the participants to join. Hi everyone, hope you all are doing well and having a wonderful weekend. Myself Satvik from the Accredian product team, and today we have a wonderful product manager with us for today's speaker session. And if you all have seen the poster, I would like to welcome Siddharth. Siddharth is currently Group Product Manager at Yelp London and has nearly more than a decade of experience in building amazing products at various companies like Zomato, Snapdeal, and many more. So without waiting much longer, let's start the session. Over to you, Siddharth.
Thanks, Satvik. Very happy to be here. Thanks for the introduction. Is it okay if I just jump in directly into the content?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So let me quickly share screen. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Okay, can everyone see the presentation? Yes, okay, cool, perfect. All right. Thanks for having me. And what we'll talk about today is analytics for product managers. The way I usually do these sessions is try to keep it as engaging as possible. So what I'm going to do is after every couple of slides, I'll have some kind of a question and encourage everyone to participate. But at the same time, if you have any questions while I'm talking about it, just feel free to type in the chat or raise hand, etc. Like we don't have to wait for a question section for all of you to participate. Okay, so quickly going through the agenda, I'll the first half of the discussion will be around analytics and just trying to understand what analytics means, what is product analytics, how is it different from general analytics, why do PMs need to focus on analytics. Then I have a slide where I kind of also highlight and probably help you understand how typically product managers work with analytics and analytics teams. I think that's very important because it's kind of lays the foundation of how effective analytics becomes in your organization, in your work. And then the last maybe 10 to 15 minutes, I'll talk about metrics, how product managers use metrics, what metrics are, why they're important. And I'll also try to, if we have enough time, I have a real world product where we can walk through, if we were a PM for one of these products, how would we create success metrics? Cool. Satvik already introduced me, but maybe a bit of a deep dive. So I'm currently a GPM at Yelp. I own the experimentation and analytics for the entire org. I have a team of about 6 PMs who handle different aspects of analytics and experimentation. I have about 10 years experience as a PM, almost 13 in total. And I worked in different types of companies, started with startups, worked with high growth companies like Zomato, was with Snapdeal for a while when they were growing at a very fast pace, and also had a startup of my own somewhere in between. From an education perspective, I'm a computer engineer. I also have an MBA, and I graduated in 2014 from MBA, and since then I've been into product management. I absolutely love to read and learn more about product management. I also love sharing what I learn, and I very actively share everything that I know, everything that I've done as a product manager on LinkedIn and Twitter. Okay, cool. So before we jump in and talk about what is analytics, I'd love to hear from the group, maybe in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself or raise your hand. What do you think analytics actually means? Like in your capacity as a PM or whatever you've done, help me understand what you think analytics is. Okay, Vallabh says features, usage data. Shamli says analyzing data. Analytics gives customers in street. I didn't get that. Study data. Okay. Insights, exploring data. Insight on data. So I think some of you kind of are thinking of it in the right manner. Some more responses. Quantitative framework that relies on numbers, database statistics, interpret the data. Okay, so I think all of you are in the same like in the right direction. But a simpler way to define it is that analytics is usually a quantitative method to derive meaning, right? So a lot of people wrote getting insights from data, etc. Insights could also be qualitative, right? It could be subjective. But when you talk about analytics, it's usually quantitative, right? There is qualitative analysis also, which if we have enough time, we'll cover. But typically, that's how we think of analytics. But I think a lot of you got the second part right, where analytics, the core of it is when you're looking at data and you're trying to drive meaningful insights from it. Okay. Another question for the group. What do you see on your screen? Is there anything that you notice from it? Feel free to type in the chat. Difference of two odd numbers, odd and prime, odd. Okay, cool. I think everybody got it. Same question. What do you see in the list on your screen now? Metro cities, top cities, tier 1, metro cities of India. Okay. So I think those who responded, everybody, cities and states, everybody got it right. But the message or the point here is not to actually get it right. The point is that what everybody did right now is actually analytics. You looked at something and you derived meaning out of it. And that is as simple as analytics gets. Obviously, it can get complicated, but just to help everybody understand that even this is analytics, and you look at something and you derive meaning out of it. So now what I'll share is that something real world that happened very, very recently. So, I was recently ordering a microwave for myself, and this is one of the screens that, I looked at, and I started comparing because my high level criteria are kind of defined. I needed something between 80 to 90, maybe 100 pounds. I usually, whenever I buy from Amazon, I usually try to buy things which are at least 4.2 or higher rated. They need to have high number of reviews, etc. So when I looked at this screen, right, this in itself is analytics, right? I'm trying to look at data and I'm trying to make a decision. Okay. Some Zen is saying my volume is low. Is that a problem for everyone? Am I not very clearly audible? Okay, Alan says clear to me. Can a few other people let me know? Clear. Okay. All right. So on this screen, right, this is the reason I put this screen is that even when you don't realize in your day-to-day, you are doing some kind of analytics, right? And this is a perfect example for it. Even when, let's say, you're deciding what to do on a Saturday or a Sunday, or you're going out with your family and friends and trying to choose a place to go to, be it a restaurant or be it anything else. There is some kind of analytics going in your mind where you have some parameters of, hey, in terms of restaurants, A, B, C are good, D is not that good, or E is very crowded on a Saturday, there's no point going. So analytics is kind of inbuilt in our brains, but we don't consciously always realize it. What that also means is that everybody is doing it day to day, and everybody has the skill set. We just need to kind of apply it in the right place in the right manner. Okay, so now we kind of spoke about analytics in general. Let's switch gears a little bit and make it more relevant for product management and product managers. Again, start sharing thoughts on what do you think is product analytics, and help me understand how you think it is different than analytics overall. Okay, I'm not getting any responses. I don't know if analyzing the features quality. Okay, analyzing products. So I think, when you're defining analytics, if you're using the word analytics in it kind of takes away, the essence of the message. So try to help me understand what analyzing products really means, whether it is adding value, metrics to measure how the product works. It's more of how the product performs, product behavior, product usage from the customer, difference of products, features and value. Yeah, I think most of the responses are on point. Um, when you think of product analytics, right, I think somebody mentioned something about users. It's basically trying to understand behaviors of the users of the product while they're using the product, right? What that means is that when, let's say a lot of you who are in this room are using, let's say Instagram or LinkedIn or Twitter, like whatever social media platform you use, right? There is a very high chance that different people in the room use it differently. So, for example, if you talk about LinkedIn, let's say I use LinkedIn to do two things. One is, just to catch up on, what's happening, read, but I also very actively share. There might be other people in this room who primarily use it for, looking for jobs or opportunities. There might be other people who use it for, networking and connecting with people, other people for other reasons. So all of these behaviors are very different. And a PM needs to kind of understand and identify these behaviors, because if you don't do that, then you can't really create a product that solves a real problem. So the most commonly thought product analytics that we think of when we think of analytics is primarily how do you measure adoption, how do you measure engagement, how do you measure retention, because these are the three very, very prime or important categories of product lifecycle. And when we do the real world example, we'll kind of dive deep into what each of these mean and how we can measure them. The last point is something that I want to reiterate before I move on to the next slide is, without analyzing data or behavior or usage, it is kind of tough, maybe even impossible, to know what is your user's problem and your user's need. And unless you know the need, no matter what solution you create, people won't use it, right? People only use a product if it's solving a problem for them, right? So in the examples that I was sharing earlier, the problem is I want to keep up to date with certain things, or I want to share my learning. That's my problem statement. Somebody else is looking for a job. Their problem statement is, how can I find a job? So until and unless LinkedIn as a product is not appreciative and acknowledges this problem statement, whatever product they create, you might not use it. Okay. One more question for the audience. Given the context that we spoke about and all of the responses that all of you shared, why do you think, what are the top 2 or 3 things that make analytics or product analytics very important for product managers? Make products better. Yes, that kind of summarizes the add more value. Data-driven decision making, that is very important. Very important to come up with new features. Akshay raised his hand. Can somebody unmute Akshay? Okay, Akshay, you should be able to talk now. Categorize users and problems, understand trends and make strategic decisions, continuous improvement, better decision making. Okay. All right, let me go ahead. So I think some of you nailed it, right? In my mind, analytics is pretty much the most critical aspect for decision making, right? And the other aspect of decision making is, how do you know decision making is good, right? I mean, everybody can make decisions, but that doesn't make it a good decision. And it's very important for PMs to make good decisions. So if you're doing analytics right, if your teams are structured in the right way, if you have the right tooling, right systems, right processes, analytics will increase the quality and the velocity of decision making, which is very, very important. The other way to look at analytics, and we will go in deep into this a little bit, is that in my mind, analytics is always an answer. Data is always an answer. But if it's an answer, somebody needs to be asking questions, right? So if you ask the right questions and assuming you get the right answer, that is how you make decisions and create actions and create roadmaps and features and all of that. The second one, which is also fairly popular, something that we the example that I was trying to call out with, let's say, the Amazon microwaves, is that you also try to identify trends, right? So when I was looking at one of the microwaves and I was reading reviews, somebody spoke about that the microwave gets really, really hot very, very soon. And then when I dug deeper, there were more and more people talking about the same problem. So there's clearly a trend where I see people talking about this, and it usually happens after 3 months of buying and whatnot. That's a real world example, but in a product example, you could look at things like, let's say, my adoption rate, and we are sort of looking at it, year on year or month on month, and we can see a trend of it going up or down. So usually trends is a very common use case for analytics. And then finally, I think a lot of you already mentioned this on the chat, is when you're looking at this, you're trying to understand behaviors and trends. Hopefully, if the analytics is right, the data is accurate, you are identifying opportunities. You are identifying what is the problem and hopefully what is a good solution, and hence what is the impact that I can create for it. And all of this, right? The problem identification, the problem sizing, the impact sizing becomes a very, very critical part into your roadmap. So if you're not doing analytics correctly, if you're not doing enough of it, then the quality of your roadmap will start suffering, especially when you're at a bigger scale. Okay. So help me understand, wherever you are in the org, as a product manager or as any other function, how do you work with analytics in your organization? What are some of the challenges you face, and what are some of the advantages of working with an analytics team? Getting the right data, we need to share details with them. They will come up with the data. Okay, any more? Get insights from analytics team and improve the product based on feedback. Scrum meetings, different way to interpret data. That's a really good point. Okay, cool. Let me jump in. So the following slide is based on a setup where the assumption is that this is a medium to a large sized org, not a very small or a early stage startup, because when there is in an early stage startup, the analytics teams are not like, there are necessarily no specific analytics team. There are PMs or engineers or some people with different roles who are kind of filling that role. So that's the assumption here. So typically what happens is that a product manager is connected and the point of contact for multiple stakeholders. That's what you see on the right. So, sales or leaders or customer support, marketing, etc. All of these people could have questions, right? So for example, the salesperson could have a question of, hey, can you help me understand how have we been selling in the last year, and how do you project the sales to be in the next year? Or can you help me understand what is the persona of the business or persona of the user that is paying us the most amount of money? Similarly, customer support can have questions like, hey, can you help me understand what type of users have the biggest problems and how have we solved it and what is the impact of it? So that's usually the first step. There is a question coming from somewhere. I think one of the things I missed in the diagram is that the question can also come from the product manager themselves, right? As soon as the question comes in, the product manager usually would go to an analytics team, assuming the question is new and it's not been solved earlier. If it's been solved earlier, then the product manager will already have an answer, or they will have a dashboard where they can just point the stakeholders to. But let's assume it's a brand new question. They would then go to the analytics team. Now, depending on the size of the org, within the analytics team, you can have different personas, right? So this is an example from, let's say, where I work, which is, fairly mature org, fairly large org. We have something that people or a team that's called as analysts. There is a data science team. There are financial analysts that primarily work for sales and the CFO, and there are restaurant analytics and things like that. So as soon as the question comes in, the product manager will then probably work with somebody who we internally call as, let's say the analytics head or the insights head or something like that. And they will identify the right team or the right person to field that question. When that happens, the next step is that, let's say the analyst or the data scientist, whoever is the right person, will go back to the PM with some data, which kind of partially or completely answers the question they had asked. But that's not where the process ends. What happens after that is that typically in an organization that really values analytics and does it correctly, the product manager and the analyst or whoever is the person, the data scientist, they will sit together, they will interpret and understand the data together, right? This is where now what you're doing is you're distilling insights from data, but you're also getting a perspective from the person who owns the data, because they have a lot of context and they might be able to see things differently. So I think somebody mentioned in the chat, getting a different perspective, which is very, very important. That's one. Second is that the leftmost box is usually also known as the source of truth, which basically means that these are the people who understand the data more than anybody else in the org. So they are also the ones who will ensure that everybody is interpreting it correctly. Just to give like a very, very high level example, let's say there is a field called restaurant_visitors. Now, whoever is consuming this data field might interpret it very differently. Like visitors, like, does it mean people walking into the store? Does it mean they're ordering online? Does it mean they're just visiting their website? That is where, the team on the left either shares documentation or in these meetings help you understand what does it really mean, so that you interpret it correctly. And then the final step is that when you go back to your stakeholders, you're actually sharing insights. You also share access to data so that, if they want, they can run their own analysis, etc. But as this central point of intelligence, you are responsible for sharing insights first, helping them understand how you drove those insights, but also being transparent and sharing the raw data with them so that if they wanted to do their own analysis, they could. Okay, before I move on, I'm going to pause here because I'm going to switch gears a little bit and start talking about metrics. I'll pause here and see if there are any questions on analytics or anything else that you want me to talk about before we start getting deeper into metrics. Go ahead, Tejas, if you have a question. Okay, Amar says, what if there is a difference of opinion? So I think ideally, when there is data, opinions shouldn't, like in an ideal world, shouldn't come into the picture, right? Like you can interpret a specific field wrongly, but if you're looking at the same data and trying to draw insights, assuming your math is correct, and that's a separate issue where you be sure that there are no mathematical or calculation errors, but assuming your math is correct, it's very hard to have a different opinion, right? People might still be surprised by hearing something they did not expect, but data and analytics is actually the solution to the problem that you're calling out, Amar. Like every time there is a difference of opinion, just get data in so that everybody is looking at the same numbers and they interpret it similarly. how to go about if there is no analytics team. So I think there is no one size fits all answer to that, Neha. What usually happens is that either the product manager or the engineer or this group together will then start playing the role of the analytics. But it just kind of depends on the org. I've worked with a lot of startups where the PM and the engineers are responsible for it. I worked with orgs which are slightly, not too early in the startup stage, but slightly more mature. They actually start hiring one or two people, and they, those people kind of become the analytics team. But the core of the message is that no matter how many people you have or not, as a product manager or as an entrepreneur, you cannot make sound decisions without doing analytics. So it has to be done. Darshan, I think that the above should have answered your question to some extent, but there are two aspects to it. One is that every time you have a question, there might be scenarios where you already know the answer. In that case, you will not go to the analytics team. There might be scenarios where you have the data to drive the answer. Even in that case, you don't need to go to the analytics team. And as above, if there is no analytics team, then you kind of just become the analyst yourself. Tejas, the steps 0, 1, 2 question insights. Sorry, I didn't get your question, Tejas. Like, what's the question about it? Okay, while Tejas types, I'll move on to the next question. What are a few analytics tools PM should be aware of? So, I usually don't like recommending tools or so naming a few. I'm more than happy to help you understand. I have used Mixpanel, I've used Hotjar, I've used Google Analytics. Google Sheets has been the primary analytics for me. I've used Tableau, but the tools that you use don't really make a difference. What makes a difference is, do you have the ability to consume, process large amounts of data and get an insight from it? And if you're able to do that, it doesn't matter what tool you're using, right? If you're able to look at data and just drive insights, that is what matters. And secondly, I also think that a product manager is usually aware enough that they can start learning a new tool very, very soon. So even if you're experienced with Google Analytics, but your new organization uses Mixpanel, it won't take you more than a week to sort of ramp up on it. Okay, what are types of questions that we can ask as a PM to the respective analytics teams to obtain important insights? I think that's a really good question, Zen. Maybe I should have mentioned this. So depending on the size and maturity of your analytics teams, the questions you ask will be very different. What that means is that, let's say if you're in a fairly mature org where the left box on your screen has been in the company for a long time, there are some senior analysts who are very experienced, then you can ask high level questions of, hey, I'm trying to look at ideas for I'm trying to look at opportunities for improving my retention. Can you help me understand what I should do? And in that case, the senior analyst will then create a couple of hypotheses. They will analyze a lot of data from different lenses and try to come up with some potential answers, and then together you dive deep. But if your team is fairly junior or there are lesser people, then your questions are a little more specific. So then you might say that, hey, you know what, I want to look at the drop-off that is happening between the cart page and the payment page for people in Delhi who are using iOS between 4 to 6 p.m. So this question is super specific, right? Which basically means that the person on the left in the left box might not be able to think of these specifics because they don't have context, because either they're junior or they're new in the org. So that kind of, the question will, ambiguity of the question will keep changing based on the seniority of the people you're working with. Should a PM have skills on database to do the analytics? The ideal answer, it is not a requirement. If you do have that skill, it is definitely a bonus. It just makes things easier. You might be able to do a lot of analytics on your own rather than waiting for the analytics team to get back to you. What is the data to answer question? So step number 2 is basically, when you talk to an analyst or whoever is on the left box, they should be doing 2 things for you. One is they should be giving you access to structured and formatted data that will help you answer the question that you asked. Two is they should also be sharing some level of answer from their, their opinion. So two is where they give you the data and you are free to make your analysis, make your interpretation, right? Three is where you're sitting together and you're kind of comparing notes and seeing if you're analyzing it correctly, or if you have missed something and the analyst has a better insight for you. Balakrishna says, any example where you analyze data correctly and the decision went wrong? I think the answer is yes, right? I mean, just by looking at data and interpreting it doesn't guarantee the right decision, because data, I mean, as cliched as this might sound, data will always tell you things about the past, but you are making decisions for the future. And it is not necessary that the past behavior will repeat in the future, right? Like an extreme example of this is all of the consumer trends that happened pre-COVID didn't happen during COVID, and some of them have changed for the good. So yes, it happens. And what you typically try to do in such situations is you try to build assumptions and you try to minimize those assumptions as you go along. Okay, cool. Let me move on. So let's get a little specific, right? Again, question to the audience. I'm sure everybody would have heard the word metrics. Some of you might have used it in your jobs. Help me understand how you define metrics, what they do for you. Are they important, not important? Okay. Evaluation parameters for specific variables, statistical based on logical access. Metrics are really important facts. Insights obtained through data, values against parameters, benchmarks to measure, measurement of product parameters. Okay. Some of the answers are on point, but some of them are a little off. I think somebody mentioned something similar, right? Outcomes or performance. So basically, metrics are data points that help you measure performance, right? So if you think about real world scenarios, when you, let's say, buy a car, a lot of people ask the question of, what is the mileage, or what is the engine capacity, right? All of these are metrics, right? You're measuring the performance of the car through these metrics. When I was looking at a microwave, I was looking at, the wattage or the capacity, like 2 liters, 3 liters. These are all metrics. So metrics are ways of helping you measure something. And that something usually is of very high importance to the product manager. And the reason they're important is because you will base decisions on that and create your roadmap and create more features and so on. So, what you see on the screen is a common, is an example of some commonly used metrics, DAUs, which is daily active users, churn rate, average revenue, etc. I won't go into the list of metrics, but I do have, a resource that's available. I'll be sharing this deck. If you click on this picture, you can get access to this Notion database for free, which basically talks about the most commonly used metrics in an online product. And when I created this, I just used Instagram as an example. So feel free to go through this. It kind of breaks it down into, the typical activation, adoption, engagement, monetization, retention. Every metric has a lot of detail of what the metric is, what it means, why is it important, how is it measured. Okay, now let's kind of make this more like, let's ground this in reality. A lot of what we saw until now is very theoretical, right? Like what do metrics mean, common use metrics, etc. Now, how does this come into play in the life of a product manager? So let's say that I'm, sorry, Vallabh, the link is already on the slide. If you click on the picture, it'll take you to the right link. I'll share the deck with everyone so everybody has access to the links. So in the real world, let's say I am a product manager for Instagram Reels, right? Reels is like a specific feature within Instagram, and I need, as a PM, I need to be sure that I know my product is working, it is successful, or it is not. And to answer this question of is it successful or not, I need metrics. So that's the real world application. So no matter what you do, how large of a product you own or how small, you'll always be expected to answer the question of, hey, is this successful? Is this good, bad, ugly? And the only way to answer that is if you have the right metrics in place. So now the question becomes, how do we define metrics, right? We'll stick with the Instagram reuse example. I also have some specific answers for that. But every time I think of metrics, there are 3 or 4 major categories that I want to think about when I'm creating a list of metrics. The first one is that you need to start with the company goal, right? What that means is that if you create metrics that measure something that is not important to the company, or it does not add to the goal of the company, then your metrics are kind of useless, right? You can keep measuring it, you can keep tracking progress, you can keep improving it, but if it's not adding to the company, nobody cares. So until and unless in your mind, you know the company goal or the company focus area for the year, no matter what metrics you create, it'll always be, it'll not add value to your life. So that's step one. No matter where you're at, how big of an org, how small, B2C, B2B, always start with the company goal. The second bucket is what I call as North Star or primary metric. I'm sure some of you might have heard North Star. It's kind of a commonly used term, but it's also not very easily understood. North Star, before I talk about the metric, just to help everybody understand how this metric gets the name, North Star is basically an actual star, which has been used by navigators when there was no GPS, no maps, in the older age, to identify the geographical north of the earth. So what that means is you just look up at the sky, you see where the North Star is, and you know that is north, and then you can see if you want to go west, east, south, whatever. So in a way, North Star is always your guiding light, right? If we now think of a metric, if you are going towards the North Star, that means your North Star is moving in the right direction, you're doing good, your product is doing good, right? But the problem is that just measuring the North Star is never enough, right? So I'll give you an example here, which I very commonly use. Think of any food delivery app, right? Uber Eats, Zomato, Swiggy. They could have a North Star of increasing the number of orders. Now, that's a really good North Star because that's what the company is, trying to do. They're just trying to get more people to place more orders. But if I only target that as my North Star and I don't measure anything, a lot of the things in the background could be breaking, right? Maybe I'm increasing my number of orders, but maybe the average delivery time is increased by 10 minutes. Maybe as a result of this, the number of complaints have gone up. As a result of this, a lot of the restaurants are also complaining that, we are not able to deliver, we are getting bad rating, we don't want to work with you, things like that. And as a result, a lot of the things start going downwards, which will eventually start also impacting your North Star. So the point is that while North Star gives you a very, very good way to know if you're going in the right direction, but if you look at one metric to gauge success, there is a high chance that something in the background is breaking and you will not be aware of it. That is where the next bucket comes in, which I usually like to call a secondary or health metrics, which now starts measuring everything else that is also important with your North Star. So in this case, we would also measure things like, average delivery time, and it should not go down when the orders are increasing. We should measure things like CSAT, which is customer satisfaction. We should measure things like number of issues or queries or whatever, like whenever you have issues, you start a chat, so number of chats initiated and things like that. Now, when you start measuring all of this together, then you have higher confidence that you're actually creating an impact and you're going in the right direction. The last one is what I call as guardrail. Guardrails are metrics that you don't necessarily impact through your product, but you want to ensure that these metrics don't drop, right? So what that means is, let's say you're a PM of, again, going back to the Instagram Reels example, and there is a new feature that you launched on Reels, which has increased the engagement on the Reels, but it has decreased engagement overall for Instagram as a whole. As a result, the revenue generated per user, or the average revenue per user, has dipped. Now the question is, will you still launch this feature on Reels or not? And that is where these guardrails become very important, because as a Reels product manager, revenue is not my responsibility. I'm not trying to increase it. I'm just trying to increase engagement and retention on Reels. But if revenue is an important metric for my company, as a PM, I should be very, very clear that I cannot do anything that reduces the revenue. So all of the metrics that you don't impact directly, but you want to ensure they don't go in the negative direction, are usually called as guardrails. And when we go through an example, maybe it'll become a little clearer. So just to summarize, how to think of metrics is that always start with a company goal, then have a North Star metric, which should give you a very good sense that you're in the right direction, but then have relevant secondary metrics that kind of also measure the health of everything happening, let's say under the hood, so that nothing is breaking. And then have guardrail metrics to ensure that you are not negatively impacting the company or any other product manager's product area. Okay, I will pause here quickly to see if there are any questions. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to dive deep into each one of these. So I'll talk about a North Star, I'll talk about secondary metrics, I'll talk about guardrail metrics, and help you understand how these metrics are created. Before that, let me know in chat if there are any questions. Sorry, Tejas, I didn't get your question. Yeah, we'll talk about how to define a North Star metric. That is exactly the next part of the presentation. Yes, I think Zain, that it is possible, and in more cases than not, metrics will be related to each other. What that means is that if your North Star is around, let's say, measuring the time spent on an app, then a lot of your health metrics will also be around time spent or things that impact time spent and things like that. So when we go through the example, we'll definitely talk about that as well. Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Mani. How to differentiate between the company goal and a North Star metric? Short answer to that is a company goal is usually broad and it is company level, which means it is not necessarily a product goal. And you as a product manager or a product leader, when you're creating a North Star metric, you're kind of trying to create something that measures the product in a way that adds value to the North Star, right? So just to give you an example, when we think of Instagram or Meta as a parent company, their higher level vision is connecting people, allowing them to create communities, etc. Now that is the company goal, right? But when you're thinking of Instagram Reels, your metric will be more around, let's say, the time spent on Reels or number of Reels interacted with and things like that. So North Star will be very, very closely measuring the company goal, but it will also have some flavor of the product. So that is why it is really critical to have it, because if you don't have it, then the vision is kind of vague usually, and it's very hard to measure it. So again, when we go through the example, hopefully it will become clearer. If not, feel free to ask the question again. I think, Sweta, yes, the answer is, short answer is yes. Usually the company goal is driven from the vision or the mission or both. But, when you call it a goal, it's usually interpreted as a goal. So, vision could be like Elon's vision is, taking humanity to Mars. Now it's kind of hard to measure as a goal, right? So maybe you translate that and you put it into that have enough successful landing on Mars, or sorry, have 25 successful landings on Mars in the next 5 years. So it is always driven from the vision. If the vision is kind of vague and subjective, then you just make it a little more objective. Goals are usually, so the question is the goal broken down into short-term ones? The answer is yes. I mean, when you set goals, it kind of depends at what level you're doing it. There are longer-term goals. So if you are the CPO or a product leader, you're probably setting goals for at least a couple of years. But if you're a PM on that team, you're setting goals for more for immediate measurement, which means that, hey, I launch a feature today. As soon as it is launched, I want to start measuring if it's successful or not. And at the same time, I want to measure if it is contributing to the larger goal or not. So short answer is yes, you will always have short-term goals and long-term goals. All right, let me proceed. So now we'll kind of dive deep into each of the above metrics. And before that, one of the things that I want to call out, and something that I've noticed when I talk to product managers, be it in interviews or in general, whenever they're trying to set goals, there are a couple of mistakes they make, and that's what I want to highlight on this slide. Every time you think of a metric or a goal, keep it simple, right? The moment you start complicating the math behind it, you will kind of lose that battle, and you're setting up for failure. So if there is a metric that is so complicated to calculate that it takes you more than 30 seconds to explain to someone else, that's not a good metric, right? Good metric should be fairly simple. Even if it is a calculation, it should be fairly simple, like an average or a simple addition or a simple division and things like that. The moment you make it complicated, you will lose the battle, because every time you present that to your manager or to a stakeholder or to an analyst, you will have to explain it, and hence it is not efficient. The other thing that I've seen a lot of people overlooking is when they create these metrics, they only think of one user when creating metrics. So now if I go back to the Swiggy Zomato example where we were thinking of number of orders as a North Star metric, when I'm creating my health metrics, I need to think of all parties involved. I need to think of the person who's the person who's placing the order, so the one who's consuming the food. I need to think of restaurants, because if I don't have restaurants on my platform, I can't sell anything. I need to have I need to have metrics for my delivery partners or delivery riders, because if they're not there, I can't deliver food. So the first step that you should do while creating metrics is what I call as create the user ecosystem. Try to identify all of the users in the chain. And when you think of your health metrics, ensure that you're measuring success for all of them. Because even if one of them is unsuccessful, the entire ecosystem will fall. Let's say, if your delivery riders become so unhappy because you're not measuring their success and they churn from the platform, you can't do anything. You have no option to deliver. Third is always have a timeline to a metric, right? Like if you're thinking of active users, think of things like weekly active or monthly active or daily active. If you're thinking of orders, think of orders per week or per month or per day. The reason to have a timeline is because, again, with the food delivery option, the food delivery example, if you look at daily orders on a Monday, they will be much lesser than daily orders on Friday, right? People tend to order more on weekends than on a weekday. But if you look at a week, it'll kind of average out. Every week will kind of behave similar. Similarly, if you look at social media, and let's say one of the metrics you want to track is average time spent on reels. Now, average time spent on a weekday will be lesser than a weekend, in a typical scenario where people just have more time on the weekends and they're browsing on their phone, etc. So if I were to look at time spent, I would look at it at a week level. So not having your time frame will introduce a lot of biases and introduce or put you in a situation where you might make wrong decisions. It is always important to have a time frame to all your metrics. Next one is fairly straightforward. A metric is an answer. So think of the question and ensure the question is right, and then go on to the answer. What a lot of people do is they keep focusing on the answer without even knowing if they're asking the right question. And I will double down and double click on what I mean by question in the next slide. The next one is that metrics need to be useful, and they need to be in a way where they can't be cheated, right? And I'll give you an example of what that means. Useful means that if you're tracking the number of orders, again, going back to our example, and if it is going back, does it really mean you're a successful company, or does it really mean that whatever feature you own is a success? It might or it might not, but you need to ask that question explicitly and be sure that when you have a list of metrics, they're actually genuinely measuring success. The opposite side, or the other side of the coin here, is metrics can be very easily gamed or cheated, right? So let's say that there is a again, in our food delivery option, there is a product manager who owns the let's say the search page, right? Where let's say you search for a dish or a restaurant and you get search results. and their primary success metric they set for themselves is CTR, click-through rate. So what that means is if 100 people are on the search page, 20 of them click on any search result, the CTR is 20%. So basically what that means is their responsibility is to get people to click on a search result, right? Now, in my mind, having only this metric is a very bad scenario because this can be cheated very easily. What I would do if I was this PM is I would, in the title of the restaurant, I would start writing things like 50% off or offer available only for you and things like that, where I'll make it clickbaity because I'm only tracking clicks. So in this case, if this PM success is only CTR, it could very easily be cheated. And that is what you need to do as a PM to understand that whatever you're doing cannot be cheated. Because if it's cheated, it's not adding value to anybody, right? And usually your guardrail metrics kind of help you prevent cheating. So in this case, if this person's goal is the CTR or number of clicks, but there is a guardrail of number of orders per week, which means that if this number goes down, this metric doesn't hold value, then it kind of holistically it kind of still measures success. So if you're increasing number of clicks and your total number of orders are same or more, then you're successful. But if you're increasing number of clicks and orders are going down as a ratio, then the system is being cheated. The last one is that there is never a perfect list, right? What that basically means is that if you have two very experienced product managers owning the same aspect and you ask them to create metrics, they will create different lists of metrics. And that's completely fine, right? You don't have to go for perfection. You just need to ensure that you're measuring the right aspects and those aspects are not cheated. That's all you need to do. Okay, now I'm going to dive deep into the 3 or 4 buckets that I shared earlier, and after the slide I'll take a pause and see if there are any questions. So let's start with the North Star metric. Like I said, North Star is your bridge between the company goal and the success of your feature or your product. So North Star should always be measuring the impact that your product has on the company goal. Usually, the easiest way to think of a North Star metric is just say the goal out loud, right? So in the case of Instagram, let's say, or Meta, let's say the goal is creating more communities. And just use that to set your North Star as a starting point, right? So if I'm thinking of creating communities, one of the ways is that the more people there are on my platform, the more communities there could be. So maybe my North Star could be just having active users or total number of users on the platform, right? Let's say I am a platform that helps people find jobs. So not necessarily LinkedIn, because LinkedIn also has a lot of social media, but let's say an IIMjobs or a Naukri.com. And the goal for a Naukri.com is to help people get more jobs, right? Now, the problem here is that getting a job is the entire process is not in Naukri's control, right? They can only connect you with the right person. But your North Star should be somehow measuring the goal, and it should have some flavor of the total jobs created through the platform. The other way to create a North Star, in my mind, is asking this question. So now going back to the guideline of ask the right question to get the right answer. Are more users using it, and are users using it more, right? So a good way to think of this is, if you think of Uber or these ride-hailing apps, when you ask people for a North Star, they could say that, hey, total number of rides per week is a good North Star. But in my mind, it's not, because people are taking cabs for a distance of 5 kilometers, but people are also taking it for 20 kilometers, for 100 kilometers, or whatever. And all of these rides are not equal, right? 5 kilometers has lesser revenue for Uber, lesser revenue for the driver. Similarly, a longer ride has more revenue for both parties involved. So in my mind, maybe a better metric is total number of kilometers driven per week, because that helps me understand that to increase my kilometers, I can get more users booking rides, or I can get users to book longer rides, right? So usually answering this question will get you very close to a good North Star. However, this is kind of limited to more of a B2C setup, because in a B2B, you can't always have more users or using your product more. Then the secondary metrics, I'd like to break it down into 2 or 3 sub buckets. First one is adoption. And here my question is, how many users are using it and how many should be using it, which I call as headroom. So going back to the example of Reels, let's say, you're kind of the PM responsible for getting adoption on Reels. Now, you might, when you start in the first, 6-8 months, maybe 20 million users use it every week, right? So your weekly active users is equal to 20 million. Now, 20 million is a large number, right? But how do you know if it's good enough? Like, does it mean that I should stop here? Does it mean I should start focusing on engagement, on retention? Does it mean I keep continuing to focus on adoption? And that is where the headroom comes in, right? Headroom basically means like, what is my universe that should be or could be using Reels, and what percentage of them or what number of them are not using it? So if I think of headroom here, I would think of it like this, where Instagram as a whole has, let's say 500 million or whatever, let's say 100 million weekly active users, and only 20 million are using Reels. So the other 80 million have access to Reels, but they're not using it. And in my mind, that's not a very good split. So my headroom is really large. So I should keep focusing on adoption. So looking at adoption as a raw number or as a raw percentage doesn't give you an idea of headroom. So always have both metrics in mind so that you know if this should still be a focus area or not. Engagement is usually the toughest to measure, and it's very dependent on 2 things. One is, what is the product, and what do you mean by engagement, right? If we again take the example of Instagram, everybody says, hey, I want to increase engagement, but the real question is like, what do you mean by engagement? Similarly, if you think of platforms like other social media like Twitter, or maybe even like Netflix or Spotify, you will have PMs focusing on engagement, but it's very difficult for us as outsiders to know what engagement means. So in my mind, the first question to ask is, how do you define engagement? What is engagement for your platform, for your product? And there are a couple of questions I ask myself here, right? Do users like the product? Because if they like it, they will engage with it in whatever form, right? I don't care if they are liking it, they're saving songs to their playlist, if they're sharing songs. I just want to know if they like it. And if they like it, I know they will take actions that I can call as engagement. If they like it, I would like to know how many users like it versus how many users don't like it, right? That's the second part of my question, like how many users are getting value of it. Do they like it enough to come back to it every day or every week or every month? It kind of plays a little bit on this is a borderline retention metric, but in my mind, if they're engaging enough or if they like it enough, they will be retained. So this metric kind of answers both questions of retention as well as engagement. And if there is a way of measuring how much value do users get, that is usually a very good metric. So in case of Spotify or Netflix, I could think of, hey, you know what, data science shows that as soon as somebody has created 5 playlists, their LTV goes up and they retain for longer. So then I would like to see how many users have at least 5 playlists and things like that. Secondary metrics for quality. What that basically means is that, again, going back to the Instagram example, let's say you're doing Reels and people are really loving it. And they're spending a lot of time and they're kind of hitting your metrics. But how do you measure that the quality of their experience is good? How do you know the content they're viewing is actually to their liking? Or how do you know that they are not getting pissed off when they're trying to find the right content? It's not taking them 3 minutes to find the video that they've been searching for. So there need to be some metrics around, quality of how you measure their experience. When they're looking at Reels, are they just, blindly swiping and not even stopping? Because if they're not stopping, that means they're not finding anything relevant, means you're showing bad quality. The last one is also tied to quality, but it's more from a supplier's perspective. So in this case, in the Instagram case, suppliers, people who create content, the creators. And what you want to ensure is that is there enough diversity of content, right? Let's say if Reels today started showing only content on stand-up comedy or food recipes, majority of the platform will churn, right? Because there are people who are consuming it for different reasons. People are consuming it for education, for entertainment, for recipes, for whatever. So it is very critical to measure that your diversity, the quality and the quantity and the diversity of the content is available on the platform. Okay, I again have another resource where a free resource where I've tried to create North Star metrics, as you can see on your screen. And when you click on them, you can see more details. So feel free to grab it. Okay, so I'm going to do a time check. So we're at 1:30. We're already at time. I wanted to save some time for question and answer. So let's do that. But the remaining part of the slides actually walks through Instagram Reels as an example. And then it talks through how I would create metrics, like how I would create the company goal, how I would create the North Star, the adoption metrics, engagement, etc. So feel free to take a look at your time. If you have questions, you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn and Twitter. The other thing that I'll say is that if you're ever trying to get better with metrics, believe me when I say this, this is the easiest thing you can do on your own. You don't need anybody's help, right? Just pick up any product you use, any app on your phone or any app on your TV or anything, any software that you use, be it SaaS or whatnot, and then ask yourself, hey, I want to measure success for this. How would I do it? And then just go through the entire exercise, right? There are also a lot of online communities who keep posting such questions. I do this very often on Twitter, where I'll just post a question of, hey, how do you measure success of ChatGPT? How do you measure success of Netflix? How do you measure? Every time I come across a new feature launch like Android or iOS, I'll just post on Twitter and say, how do you measure success with this? Yeah, that's pretty much all I had in terms of content. If you all want a practice question, I put one here where Swiggy usually has this section where they have all of the offers, like you can get discounts and promos and whatnot. If you were the PM who owned this aspect, how would you measure success? All right. So I'm still here for another 15 minutes. If there are any questions, comments, please feel free to type in chat. Also feel free to unmute yourself and ask. More than happy to answer. Yeah, Manoj, I'll share the deck with the Accredian team and they can share it with all of you.
Yeah, thank you, Siddharth. Thank you for the amazing session. So everyone, if you have any questions, you can post it in the Q&A box. So let us know if you have any questions.
Okay. Yeah, Neha, I'll answer that question, even though it's not entirely relevant to this conversation. I mean, UI UX is really, really important in a B2C setup. If you're creating products that have a visual aspect to it, you need to understand it. You need to work with designers and then create metrics around it as well. Darshan, how do we measure quality aspects of metrics? Is it not, as it's not quantitative? Actually, that's not entirely true, Darshan. It is true to some extent. Sorry, not entirely. When you think of quality, right, you can try to objectify it in your mind. So, the example, when you read through the Instagram Reels example, in my mind, one of the quality measures is in a session, how many times does a user scroll through a reel without looking at it? And if that number is high, it kind of tells me that their quality of experience is not good because they're not even looking at what we are presenting them with. Similarly, if I were to look at, a Zomato or a Swiggy example, I would look at, ratings from an order. If people are happy, they're getting good quality service, good quality delivery, good quality food, they will rate their experience is high. So it is not impossible to get quantitative measures for quality, but in cases where it is, you would just run a survey or you would just call 100 people and ask them. Zain's question is, what resources do you use to get a stronghold? I think there are, in my mind, you can't have resources to help you get stronger in analytics. The only thing you can do is you can solve real problems in the real world. And you don't need to be a product manager. You don't need to work at Meta to solve these problems. I'm sitting here solving these problems, thinking of Instagram Reels or Netflix or Spotify. You can do the same. The only help you will need, if you've not done analytics enough, is to validate if you're thinking in the right direction. And that's where all of these online communities come into play. So just talk to more people, solve problems together, and you'll be able to master it. Yeah, I mean, to Neha's question, can UI UX be a factor of analytics? Of course, in the sense of every time a designer creates, let's say, again, going back to the example of Spotify, let's say, right? And one of the higher engagement or high value actions that they have is creating a playlist or saving a playlist or saving a song to a playlist. Now, if your UI and UX is not making this process simple, then things will fall apart. So even when a designer starts thinking of, hey, how can I make it simpler for people to create playlists? They are looking at metrics. They are looking at things like, if 100 people want to save a playlist, how many of them are able to do it? And is that number very high? If it's not, how can I improve it? Why do some companies require PMs to know data analytics? Is it really mandatory? I think there are two questions on this, Sweta. Companies shouldn't require people to know specific tools. If they do, I mean, I can't say much. Like every hiring manager kind of sets their expectations. But in general, if you're not comfortable with data, if you're not comfortable with analytics, forget companies requiring it or not. As a PM, it's very hard to succeed, because if you can't back your decisions by evidence or by objective measures, which is data, then people will not trust you. And if they will not trust you, they will not do what you want to do, and which means that you are not adding value to the entire chain. So analytics, in my mind, is a very, very important skill that every product manager should have. Tooling for me is a no-brainer. Like everyone can just pick up new tools. It doesn't take too long. Yeah, Amar, I think I'll mention a few. So like I said, I do this pretty often on Twitter. There is another one called productmanagementexercises.com, which is more targeted towards interviews. But one of the typical interview questions is, what we did here, how will you measure success, or how will you create success metrics for X? X could be anything. It could be a product or a feature or anything like that. Okay, seems like no more questions. It was great talking to you all. It was super engaging. I loved the questions in the comments everybody shared on chat. Like I said, I'll share the deck with everyone. If you want to connect with me, just feel free to ping me on any of the social media channels.
Yeah, thanks, Siddharth, for the wonderful session. So we would be just a second. I think there are a few questions in the Q&A box.
Okay, sorry, I didn't see the Q&A box. Okay, let me see. So Pramod says, may I know if it is important to set product metrics based on company vision and mission? Please give your view. It has to be, right? I mean, think of it this way. Like I'll share an extreme example. If the company, and again, let's go with the Spotify example or any of these OTT or music or video examples, right? If the company's focus area for the year 2024 is driving more people to use the product for longer, so increasing the time spent on the product, right? If that's their goal or focus area, and what you are working on is not contributing to that in any way, directly or indirectly, then nobody cares, right? Like, unfortunately, you will not get credit for the work you're doing. And even if your product is successful, right? Let's say you are trying to increase retention, right? And what that means is you're trying to get more and more people to keep paying the monthly subscription fee or however you measure retention. And if that's not making them spend more time on the app, and hence not adding to the company goal, then it's not the right thing to do, right? And typically in such cases, what happens is, like, most of the product companies do some kind of planning where they do a annual planning or a semi-annual or a quarterly, and every PM kind of shares a list of ideas based on the vision, and then all of the senior leaders will look at the ideas and then challenge you and try to understand from you that how does this contribute to the company goal, and if it doesn't contribute, then in all probability that idea gets either deprioritized or completely off the list. So it is always important, and if you're not doing it, then you're not adding value to the company. Naeem says metrics or B2B. So I think the underlying thought process for how you get a North Star, how you get a secondary metric, how you get a guardrail metric is still the same. The only thing is that, when you ask questions like, how does the user like the product? The answer will be different, right? So for an Instagram or a Spotify or a Netflix, if the user likes it, they're spending time, easy to measure. In an enterprise or a B2B product, even if they like it, they will only use it for a specific time period, which is their actual requirement. So if it's let's say it's an invoicing app, right? And if this person needs to create 10 invoices a day, they will only create 10 invoices a day, even if they love your product. So they will only spend whatever 10 into X minutes per call. So the question will be the same. The answer is where you will have to go deeper, maybe talk to your users and ask them, hey, help me understand, do you like the product? And then try to gauge what are some signals that can tie it to a metric. Akshay's question is, what should be the mix of analytics and market research? I think it kind of depends in the sense of, like, I don't know what context you're asking in, but in general, there has to be a good mix when you're thinking of a roadmap. Because when you're thinking of newer products, newer features, analytics will tell you what your users are doing today, right? It'll tell you what they like, what they hate, the things they are unable to understand, if it's easy to use, difficult to use. But it will not tell you how the user will behave tomorrow. Will their behaviors, will their preferences, will their tech affinity, will their devices, etc., change or not? But market research might give you some insight, right? Market research will give you some trends of, hey, you know what? People have stopped buying smartphones. People are going back to feature phones, and then trends change, right? That means people will not consume content or social media on phones. So when you're thinking of a roadmap, creating a vision, creating a strategy, you need to have both in your bucket, in your pocket. What is the typical frequency of gathering and analyzing data? It kind of depends on the use case. There are metrics that you want to track every day. So if you're an Instagram, you would like to look at your active users or time spent on app every day and see if it's not dropping, things like that. Similarly, if you're a Zomato, Swiggy, you would look at satisfaction and number of orders every day. But then there will be some analysis which are more one-off, or which are more not necessarily related to the core of your product. It is more around research, or let's say that, I want to understand why retention is dropping. So you'll do that analysis once, you learn from it, you start building product features, and then maybe in the next 6 months you do that analysis again. So it kind of just depends on your use case. Okay, Pramod says, we study about metrics through ebooks, online classes regarding metrics, but how can we be practical if I want to? I think if you're already a product manager, even if you're not, if you work in a product company, the best thing to do is start creating metrics around your product, your feature, start driving adoption on those metrics, right? So what that means is, when you create a set of metrics, they make a lot of sense in your mind. But until and unless everybody around you, including your manager, your counterparts, your CXOs, until they agree and believe that your metrics are correct, it's of no use. So a practical way to do that is, if other people are using the dashboards that you have created or the reports that you have created, that means everybody's getting value. So if you're already in a product org, you should do that. Even if you're not a PM, like whatever function you're in, marketing or analysts or engineering or anything, just create a dashboard and start sharing it with people. If you're not in a product org, then just do what I do, right? Like, just think of any product in the world and start creating metrics. Okay, cool. Back to you. That's all from my side.
Thanks, Siddharth. Thanks for the amazing session. So we would be wrapping up here. And thanks everyone for joining. Hope you all have a great weekend.